Hello, and welcome to Module 3, Interview Tips for Different Types of Media, Best Practices for Spokespersons in a Crisis. Today, we will discuss the task of media interviews and provide some vivid examples of what to do and what not to do to be successful. Everything that is presented today is about giving you techniques, tools, and tips to help you control any interview in any setting, thereby increasing your effectiveness. Now, you're watching Part 3 of a 4-part series. In the final module, we will cover social media in a crisis. The course objective for all of our trainings is to provide you with the best practices and tips for service members to communicate successfully with the media and the public in a crisis. Your Public Affairs Officer, or PAO, at your higher headquarters is an excellent resource for more information on these topics. These modules are presented in PowerPoint slides with video examples and questions throughout to gauge your comprehension. The format gives you the opportunity to consider your answer to certain challenges presented throughout the module. Feel free to press pause to think about your response and go back and review a section at any time. In Module 1, we reviewed basic information on how the DoD works with the media in a crisis and the various types of media. In Module 2, we showed you how to prepare for an interview and provided you with several tried and true techniques to use when giving an interview. Now in this module, we'll drill down a bit more and give you some helpful tips to use depending on what type of media interview you are giving. Module 3 will build on the techniques learned in Module 2 and help you apply them to the most popular types of media you may encounter. Specifically, we will cover different types of media interviews, helpful interview techniques, interview do's and don'ts, and what to do immediately following the interview. In Module 1, we talked about the various types of media. Different types of media cover stories differently. In the following slides, we will review tips for radio, Skype or remote interviews, print and TV interviews, and joint press briefings. Let's begin with radio interviews. Your voice will be broadcasted to radio listeners who are tuning in to learn more about the crisis. Here are some tips that are helpful if you've been asked to conduct a radio interview. Ask for a recording before the interview so the producer remembers to press record for the interview. Follow up with a request for the recording afterwards, and you can share the recording with higher command. If you are waiting for the interview to start, mute the phone. You could be recorded even before you're broadcasting live on the air. Sit up straight during phone interviews and speak clearly. Speed, inflection, accent, and tone are all important to conveying your story in a radio interview. Gestures alone, like nodding your head, come through on the radio as silence. Don't forget to stick with words. Speak clearly and don't mumble your words. If you're in the studio, stay only a few inches away from the microphone. If you are calling in by phone, do not use speakerphone or a headset, and make sure to disable call waiting and use a landline if possible. If you only have a cell phone, stay in one place with adequate reception during the interview. Beforehand, ask about the format of the interview. Does the reporter want 2 minutes? Is the reporter expecting you to take questions from the listeners? These are some of the questions you can ask. Even if you're on the radio for 10 minutes, keep your messages succinct and simple. Try to limit your answer to a question to no more than 30 seconds. Remember to repeat your key messages. Many of your listeners will not be there at the beginning of the interview, and it's important to keep that in mind throughout. People connect when they hear their names. If you're taking calls from listeners, write down their names and use the caller's name when you respond to his or her questions, especially if the nature of the call is sensitive or personal and you want to communicate empathy. If the caller is off topic, rude, or just downright crazy, always treat others with respect and use the bridging technique to bridge the conversation back to your message. Radio interviews often start and end abruptly. Be prepared to not have lead time or advance notice before going live. Assessment question number 1. You've been asked to conduct a radio interview. What are 2 to 3 helpful tips to remember for a successful interview process? Speak clearly and be animated. Your voice and tone become a large part of the message for listeners. You can be conversational but brief. You have a limited amount of time on air and need to get your message across. Repeat your key messages. Listeners may not listen to the entire interview, so repeat key points often. Use the names of the people that you're talking to. It allows the listeners to connect to you and your response to their questions. A reporter may ask for an interview via Skype if no camera crew is available. Your interview could appear on TV or online. A few tips to remember for remote interviews include: test your microphone and speakers before the interview. Make sure you have adequate connection speed. even with a good connection, anticipate a time delay or video buffering. Close any other open programs before the interview begins. Not only are they distracting, other programs can make noise. Make sure the computer is plugged into a power source. You don't want your battery to die in the middle of the interview. Make sure you look at the webcam and not the screen. Looking at the camera helps maintain eye contact with the reporter. Don't watch yourself on the screen. You could even decide to cover your picture with a sticky note if you're distracted by it. Check that you're sitting at an appropriate distance from the screen before the interview starts. Don't look down at the webcam. You may need to prop the computer up so you're looking at the camera directly. Make sure light is on in front of or above you rather than behind you for proper room lighting. Pay attention to your background. You don't want the frame to include sensitive information about the crisis response. You won't be able to read or take notes during the interview. Sometimes using a sticky note next to the webcam is helpful, but again, you don't want to make it look like you're reading directly from your notes. Let's take a look at an example of a live on-air radio Skype interview. Be sure to keep in mind the helpful tips for a successful Skype remote interview while viewing the example.
Through our new Skype capabilities with stltoday.com/McGraw, you can watch on TV. We go to KTRS's own Michael Goldie. Michael Goldie, we find you in the middle of Washington University's graduation. Good morning, Michael Goldie.
Good morning, McGraw-Millhaven. We are expecting 15,000 people right here in the Brookings Quad. You can see behind me the crowd has already started to file in. Traffic is expected to be an issue today. They are advising people to get here early. Skinker is going to be a problem. Forest Park Parkway is going to be a problem. Big Bend also expected to be a problem. They're advising people to take Metro Transit this morning. Over 2,800 degrees are being handed out today to about 2,700 graduates and their families. And of course, the students all very excited this morning.
Hold on, Michael Goldie. Michael Goldie.
He's an engineering graduate. He's from Boise, Idaho. He says he really loves St. Louis and loves WashU. He's thankful for the whole experience here. Said he's even a big Cardinals fan, so he's really enjoyed catching the Cardinals games while he's here.
Hey, Michael Goldie, there's also a problem with your phone. It's sideways. Turn it the other way so we can see you right side up. There you go. Much better. Now, you're standing in the middle of Brookings Quad, right?
That's right.
Give us
15,000 people expected here today in Brookings Quad. You can see the crowd already starting to gather behind me.
Give us a 360 view. Stand in the middle and just with your phone and with your camera, sort of give us a view of what the crowd is like and where they're going to sit.
All right. You can already see the crowd behind me. I'm going to turn my phone. You can see a view of the stage here.
Wow. Lots of chairs for those listening on radio.
After watching the live Skype radio interview, what could have made the interview better? The interview subject in radio studio should have tested the shot prior to the interview. The sideways shot distracted the listeners from the information being communicated. You'll notice that the interviewee did not pause between messages, and he just kept on talking. This made it difficult to follow the interview. Similarly, the interviewee did not anticipate the audio delay and was speaking over the radio host. The message was lost because the listeners could not understand what either the interviewee or the radio host was saying. Another problem was the host mocking the technical problems. The mocking really distracts from the overall message of the interview. Normally, another problem would have been the distracting ambient background noise, but since the subject was about the graduation celebration, this was one time where it helped to tell the story. Another interview method commonly used by the media is the print interview. Print interviews are typically more in-depth than any other type of popular media. Unless you are the subject of the story, you will probably be one of many sources used and quoted. It's helpful to provide an overview of what you're going to talk about. This will help the reporter gain an overall understanding of what you're going to convey. It will also help you gauge the reporter's grasp of the subject you are addressing. Make your messages come alive with anecdotes. Also, have statistics and background information available to support your message. Stay focused on the main message you want to convey. It's very important to answer a reporter's question as candidly as possible, but the key is to bridge back to the main points you want the audience to understand, so you can use a phrase such as, "Let me just add." Flagging is similar in that it is a way to emphasize your main point, but a flag is more like a post-it note used to emphasize your message. Flag with phrases such as, "What this means is," or "The most important thing to remember is." Convey your enthusiasm for the subject you are discussing by varying your tone of voice, using hand gestures, and sitting or standing up straight. Just be cautious so that you don't get so excited that the reporter doesn't have time to write down what you're saying. Most likely they'll have a tape recorder as well, but you want to make sure the reporter has time to take notes and understand what you're saying. Nothing is more confusing to a layperson than trying to decode military acronyms and jargon while simultaneously trying to understand your messages and formulate the story they're trying to write. If you must use an acronym, tell the reporter what it stands for. As the interview comes to an end, provide a summary of your most important points. Do not ask to see the story before it goes to print. This is an insult to the reporter, and it makes it appear that you have something to hide. Lastly, make yourself available to the reporter for follow-up questions they may have when they sit down to write the story. Assessment question number 3. List 3 things you should do when giving an interview to a print reporter. Provide an overview and summary of what you're going to talk about. Tell your story with relevant facts, figures, and anecdotes. Stories, figures, and facts help bring the message to life on paper. Stay on message. The print story will likely have other sources, and you could have limited space to get your message across. Keep to the message to help ensure the print reporter captures the most important points. In order to stay on message and convey the most important information to the print reporter, you can use methods such as bridging and flagging. What is the difference between bridging your message and flagging your message? Think of an example of each technique. A bridge is a phrase you use to bring a reporter's question back to the main points you want the audience to understand. An example of a bridge phrase is, "Well, let me add that." A flag is like a post-it note used to emphasize your message. An example of a flag phrase is, "What it means is," or "The most important thing to remember is." Remember, segments on news shows are typically 2 to 3 minutes long in a disaster. The reporters are on tight deadlines and rarely have time to research in depth before the interview. Talk show hosts have more time to conduct the interview. They often ask subjective questions and encourage opinionated responses. Be careful to stick to your messages and the facts. Make sure your messages are succinct. We've talked about this one, but consider. The average soundbite is 10 to 15 seconds long. Now, we're going to do a little test. This is what 10 seconds sounds like. Ready? Go. And stop. Now that's not a lot of time to communicate your message unless you've practiced it repeatedly. Note your posture. Do not lean away from the reporter. Do not cross your arms in front of your body. It's helpful to video your posture before the interview and adjust accordingly. During the interview, maintain eye contact with the reporter, not the camera. Eye contact shows that you are confident, sincere, and trustworthy. In broadcast interviews, don't ever grab the microphone. Many of these same tips apply to field interviews. In the field, you'll most likely be standing. Maintaining eye contact and a confident but approachable stance is key. Remove your sunglasses. It's also essential to practice this before the interview. For example, in front of a mirror. Body language matters. Now let's take a look at this field interview conducted by MSNBC correspondent Rachel Maddow with Brigadier General Ben Hodges. Keep in mind all of the information we just learned from broadcast interviews.
I mean, you get the sense both of, this is probably naive of me to say, but you get a sense equally of how hard this is and how committed the forces are to trying to make it work, despite what an uphill climb it is.
That's true. I think that, the soldiers, and you just heard the NCOP there, he's very professional.
Yes.
And they are protecting the population so that they can trust their own government is what Hamkari is all about. And the security ring is probably the most visible manifestation of that.
Do you expect, because it's so visible, do you expect it to attract attack?
I do, because the enemy will see that this is going to start having a positive effect. People will feel more secure because there's police out there these things are not toll booths, and so it'll be a threat to the enemy's ability to just kind of move around. As you saw flying over Kandahar City and driving through it, it is not a Taliban stronghold, but there is a sense of real need for law and order, and there's no doubt that there are Taliban in there. These checkpoints will significantly reduce their ability just to kind of go in, threaten people in town, and do that sort of thing. So, people worry about assassinations of government officials, that sort of thing. This is part of preventing that. There's no reason why this shouldn't be successful if the Afghans do their part.
Now that you have seen the field interview, what makes this field report such a strong interview? The field interview is a good example of a strong broadcast or TV interview for a variety of reasons, including the interview follows Operation Security guidelines. The location is telling but innocuous, and the report from the field doesn't give away sensitive information to the enemy. The interview validates the DoD's work. Brigadier General Hodges tells us what his troops are doing to help in Afghanistan, which validates the mission and the DoD presence in Afghanistan. Brigadier General Hodges promotes transparency. By allowing cameras in the area and by providing non-sensitive details of the mission, Brigadier General Hodges promotes transparency throughout the government. Throughout the interview, he is a strong and believable storyteller. He utilizes good storytelling and interview skills and makes good eye contact. Brigadier General Hodges maintains strong posture and uses his hands to help convey the story without distracting the viewer. His messages are clear and frequently repeated to ensure the key messages are clearly stated. After watching the field interview, all of the points mentioned in the previous slide are met, and the interview not only maintains the DoD's image, but enhances it as well. Now, in order to conduct a strong broadcast interview, comparable with Brigadier General Hodges' field interview with Rachel Maddow, what are 3 helpful tips to remember before going on TV? Helpful tips for a strong TV interview include: keep your messages short and succinct. Remember how short TV segments are, and keep in mind TV media uses sound bites to tell a story. Be aware of your posture. Stand tall and firm, and use your hands to communicate effectively with your body. Maintain eye contact with the reporter, and do not look at the camera or anything else. Focus your attention on the reporter. Lastly, do not grab the mic. You do not hold the mic while doing TV interviews. The final type of media interview the module will cover is a joint press briefing or press conference. You may be asked to participate in a joint press briefing with other local, state, or federal agencies. Be sure to coordinate your messages with the other agency spokespersons before the briefing. You don't want to contradict each other in front of the media. Be sure to rehearse the stagecraft before the briefing. Discuss with the other spokespersons who will stand where and what path you'll take to approach the mic, and how long you each will be expected to talk, and so forth. Remember to plan ahead for introductions. Will you introduce yourself when it's your turn to speak, or will there be an MC to introduce you? If an MC, be sure to provide the spelling of your name and your exact title and agency name. Many of the same tips for broadcast interviews, like practicing your posture, apply to filmed press briefings. It's also important to stand still and look at the person speaking at the podium. Will the press briefing organizers provide briefing materials to reporters? If so, review the materials beforehand. Make sure your name, title, and contact information are correct. Know ahead of time how you will address questions from reporters, or if any will be allowed. Will questions be allowed after each speaker, or only at the end? Most importantly, be sure to keep your statement brief and stick to what you know and what the Army is doing. Stay in your lane and never speak for another agency. You are asked to participate in a joint news conference with other government agencies. What are 2 to 3 helpful tips to remember before participating in the news conference? When participating in a joint news conference, helpful tips for an effective interview include coordinating your messaging with other people and agencies participating in the joint press conference, ensuring your messaging is concise and only speaks to what the Army is doing, and be sure to remember to stay in your lane. We have covered 5 different types of interviews you may be asked to conduct during a crisis. After the interview, there are important things to remember to ensure proper interview follow-up. As soon as you leave the studio, or if you're in the field, the reporter's presence, notify the PAO in your higher command of the results. Obtain a recording if you requested one, but keep in mind, many news stations do not provide recordings as a policy. There are professional services that record all news stations and will provide the interview for a fee. Ask your PAO. If before, during, or after the interview you promised information to the reporter, be sure to follow up quickly. Reporters have deadlines, and timeliness shows respect. This concludes Module 3, Interview Tips for Different Types of Media, Best Practices for Spokespersons in a Crisis. In the 4th and final module, we'll look at ways you can use social media in your personal life as a means to help you use social media to manage a crisis.